We always have to slow Linda's roll just a little bit.
She just gets very excited.
Yes. All right. All right, you're up, Linda.
All right. Hi, my name is Linda Gorski. I'm the president of the Houston Archeological Society, and I'd like to welcome you tonight to our program. Our speaker tonight is author and historian Jim Woodrick, who's going to speak to you on the Cannons of San Jacinto. I've worked with Jim on several archaeological sites now. He's a most interesting person, and I hope either at the end of it or the beginning of it, he will tell you a little bit about his background and what he's been doing. We've worked with him at Bernardo Plantation and at Garden Lot 26. So I give you Jim Woodrick.
Thank you. And it's a real pleasure to be here. I appreciate it a lot. Linda, thanks for all your help. A little quick thing about my background. I grew up about 5 miles from San Felipe and about 10 miles from the Bernardo Plantation. And so when we got into looking for that plantation site, and I had the good fortune to be involved in it, it was just a natural. I've been like most kids, I guess when I was about 5 years old, I don't know if you can see behind me or not, but you see that rectangular shadow box back there. There's a big yellow spearhead in it. I found that in the creek behind my house when I was about 5 years old. And I've been hooked on archaeology ever since. And it's a real pleasure. I got interested in Texas history and interested in the Revolution and in cannons, and that's what led to this talk today. We're going to do it in a video, and I prefer that in a Zoom conference because it forces me to be a little more succinct in my remarks and not wander around so much. And besides that, you don't have to see my face the entire time. So let's go ahead and watch the video, and I'll be through it, of course. And at the end, if you have any questions, it'll be my pleasure to deal with them then. So let's go ahead with the video.
Okay, I'm on it. All right, are you able to see?
Looks like it's cut off a little bit.
Okay, yeah, I had to make it small. Let's make that big. There we go. Does that look pretty good to you? All right.
Good to me.
And good. We'll get it going.
Hello. Thanks for the introduction and for the opportunity to be with you today. You wouldn't think that 3 cannons from 1836 could command such enduring interest, but if they were at San Jacinto, they do. Every year, reenactments of the battle remind us of the important role that cannons played in this engagement. Here you see some Texans in their rough garb shooting the twin sisters at uniformed Mexican soldiers who respond in kind with their golden standard. There have been long-standing debates about these cannons. Were the twin sisters iron or bronze? Were they 6-pounders or 4s? Was the golden standard really as big as it sounded? The digital revolution has made accessing obscure archival documents much easier, and now historical researchers can assemble bits and pieces of a puzzle and put them together to see the big picture. That's allowed us to better answer the questions about these cannons, and that's my subject today for you. Let's start with the twin sisters. An article appeared in newspapers in Cincinnati and in Indianola, Texas, that outlined the details of how these 2 cannons came into existence. And yes, there was a newspaper in Indianola in 1854. This article was written by 3 men who were intimately involved with initiating the manufacture of the cannons at a foundry in Cincinnati. They said the guns were 6-pounders. It was only after newspaper archives were widely digitized and placed online that this information has emerged. The story begins in Texas in mid-1835. Francis Smith was a resident who had a medical condition that needed attention, so he went to Cincinnati to be treated. He had a friend there named Elijah Slack who visited him in the hospital. Smith told Slack about the turmoil in Texas that he feared would soon turn into a war of independence. Slack and others in Cincinnati had a vested interest in Texas, both financially and through family and friends. They wanted to do something to help. A meeting was held on November the 17th in which a committee was formed to oversee the making of 2 cannons. The local newspaper reported on the meeting and its outcome, but purposely avoided any mention of cannons. They called them hollowware. The reason for this subterfuge was that it was illegal at that time for Americans to do anything to aid in a revolution against an ally, Mexico in this case. The Cincinnati locals didn't want to print anything that would draw attention from federal authorities to their cannon escapade. The cannons were cast at the Hawkins and Tatum foundry and bored out by the Chase and Seymour machine shop. Bruncia Cassett painted the carriage wheels red and blue. That sounds pretty striking, and I'm surprised that none of the eyewitnesses mentioned the colors. The foundry of Miles Greenwood made 6 barrels of 8-ounce canister shot. The cannons were finished by early December, but delayed 2 months in shipping because most steamboat captains were afraid of being caught carrying illegal contraband. Finally, they were shipped out on the steamer Splendid in late February. They arrived in New Orleans on March the 16th. Texas agent William Bryan noted their arrival, saying they were made of iron. So already we have answers to 2 of the questions. The twins were iron 6-pounders. More proof came later. The guns were shipped from New Orleans on the schooner Pennsylvania and arrived at Brazoria on March the 30th. Also on board was a doctor named Rice and his twin daughters. Someone asked the girls if they would officially present the cannons to Texas as a gift from Cincinnati. They agreed, and someone in the audience commented, "There they are, 2 twin sisters." The name for the cannons stuck. The guns were then shipped to Galveston, translated to the Flash, sent to the mainland at Morgan's Point, and up to Harrisburg on the Ohio, where they arrived on April the 9th. They were immediately dispatched by ox team to Jared Gross's Bernardo plantation on the Brazos near Hempstead, where they arrived on April the 11th. Here's a statement from Benjamin Breeding's pension application, where he says that he used his father's team to pull the guns to Bernardo from just outside of Harrisburg where they'd been bogged down. Breeding was part of the volunteer company led by Thomas Shadowix. And here is an artist's conception of what the 2 cannons might have looked like as they stood outside Gross's house at Bernardo. Before we follow the twins to San Jacinto, let's take a moment to meet the Golden Standard. There are several descriptions of the Mexican cannon, from Texans as well as Mexican Army officers. All agreed it was bronze, and some called it long. Guns of the same caliber were typically made in different sizes to suit a specific purpose. The longer ones could shoot farther and were better on ships or to bombard a fort. The short ones were more mobile and better suited as field artillery, often charged with grape shot or canister instead of solid iron balls. The Golden Standard was long, and the twin sisters were short. All of the several reports by Mexican officers about the Gold Standard said it was 6 caliber, a 6-pounder in English terminology. Most Texans said it was bigger than that, maybe because it was larger, had a loud boom, or just looked pretty menacing when it was pointed at you across the pasture at San Jacinto. One person who saw it close recorded the inscription stamped on its barrel. It was named El Volcan, or the volcano, and in Latin said it threw thunderbolts from the offended king. The Texans coined the name Golden Standard because it was bronze and a standard military cannon. Here are the detailed design plans for the Golden Standard from Mexico City archives. It was about 6.5 feet long and shows both inscriptions for the individualized cannon name near the muzzle and the generic Latin phrase lower down. Here is a summary of the Mexican artillery taken to Texas in 1836, taken from several officer reports during the campaign and in later books by participants. We know from these field reports that Santa Anna had only 2 cannons at Old Fort, today's Richmond, when he left the main army to go after the newly elected Texan government officials at Harrisburg. Both of them were 6-pounders. The closest other cannons to him at that time were 40 miles away in San Felipe and at Matagorda. There has always been some confusion about the cannons that Americans called 9-pounders and Mexicans called 8 caliber. They both had the same bore diameter and fired an iron ball that weighed 9 pounds. The Mexican nomenclature was a carryover from an earlier classification based on 1700's French units of mass that were later redefined. Now let's use a map to show the route both armies took to San Jacinto. Houston left Bernardo on the 14th, the same day that Santa Anna left the Brazos at Old Fort. The Texan government was at Harrisburg at this time. Houston's camp that night was at Isaac Donahoe's place at the intersection of 2 main roads, the Lower Coshada Trace and the National Road to Washington. On the 15th, Houston marched to Samuel McCarley's place on Spring Creek. Santa Anna made it to Harrisburg that night, just missing the Texans who had left there earlier, heading for New Washington to catch a boat for Galveston. On April the 16th, Houston's army marched to Abram Roberts' place on Spring Creek, at that famous fork in the road. To the left was a road to Nacogdoches. The army turned right and headed towards Harrisburg. Soon after the turn, Pamelia Mann came up to retrieve her oxen who were pulling the twin sisters in one of the more memorable incidents on the road to San Jacinto. After releasing her oxen, the Texan army continued to Cypress Creek and camped at Alexander Burnett's place. Santa Anna remained in Harrisburg and dispatched cavalry to New Washington to catch the Texian government leaders. They barely missed their objective. The Texans had just launched their boats as the Mexican cavalry rode up. Pamelia Mann was an innkeeper and reportedly ran a brothel in San Felipe. She was with Sam Houston at his camp west of the Brazos at Bernardo. Houston convinced her to let him use her oxen to pull the twin sisters, saying that he was going to retreat to East Texas. When the army turned right at the fork in the road, Mann demanded her oxen be returned. One eyewitness said, quote, "We got about 10 or 12 miles down the road and Mrs. Mann overtook us, out on a big prairie wallah and full of water and a very hot day. She rode up to the general and said, 'General, you told me a damn lie. You said you was going on to Nacogdoches. Sir, I want my oxen.' 'Well, Mrs. Mann, I can't spare them. We can't get our cannon along without them.' 'Don't care a damn for your cannon. I want my oxen.' She had a pair of holster pistols and a very large knife on her saddle. She turned around to the oxen and jumped down and with knife cut the rawhide that the chain was tied with. Nobody said a word. She jumped on her horse with whip in hand, and away she rode in a lope with her oxen." End quote. It just didn't pay to cross Pamelia. On the 17th, Houston marched to the junction of White Oak and Buffalo Bayous by today's Heights subdivision in Houston. Santa Anna moved from Harrisburg to join his cavalry in New Washington. On the 18th, Houston moved down to Buffalo Bayou across from Harrisburg. 500 Mexican soldiers left Old Fort to reinforce Santa Anna. On the 19th, Houston crossed Buffalo Bayou and started towards San Jacinto. The Mexican reinforcements continued their forced march. On the 20th, Houston got to San Jacinto first and set up camp on the edge of Buffalo Bayou. Santa Anna arrived about 2 o'clock that afternoon and exchanged musket and rifle fire with the Texans. Then the Golden Standard was brought up and fired, and the Twin Sisters responded with a round of grape shot that wounded a Mexican officer and killed his horse. The Mexican cannon remained where this skirmish occurred and became isolated when the rest of their army began making camp in the prairie about 3/4 of a mile from the Texans. Seeing the vulnerable Mexican cannon, the Texans opened up on it with the Twin Sisters. The first shot shattered a part of the artillery ammunition carriage, and a second destroyed some ammunition boxes. Another killed 2 mules. Cannon fire continued to be exchanged for the next 2 hours while the Golden Standard was moved into position in the center of the Mexican Army camp. This day saw a much bigger utilization of artillery on both sides than occurred in the main battle the next day. You already know the story of the battle on April the 21st, so I won't repeat the details here, only to say that cannons were used by both sides for a few minutes in the initial charge and then stopped. The Texan infantry soon overwhelmed the Mexicans, captured their cannon, and turned it around to use against them. The Twin Sisters had to stop firing as soon as the Texan infantry reached the Mexican front line to avoid casualties from friendly fire. The melee that soon ensued only involved infantry and cavalry, no artillery. Here's a depiction of the battle showing that the artillery was initially in the center of both lines of combatants. The Golden Standard never moved. It was first fired 3 times at the approaching Texans, then captured and fired once as the Mexican soldiers retreated. The Twin Sisters were rolled by men towards the Mexican line and fired several times after the Golden Standard had been silenced. This illustration is an interesting artist's conception showing the Golden Standard at the moment it was about to be captured by the Texans. You can see Sam Houston on his white horse behind the gun holding up his sword to urge his men onward. Standing right behind the cannon is General Manuel Castrillon, one of their army's most experienced and respected officers. He's trying to keep his men fighting and not running away in retreat. Moments later, Castrillon was killed beside the cannon. On the day of the main battle, Robert Hancock Hunter was posted to guard the Texan baggage across Buffalo Bayou from Harrisburg. He could clearly hear the cannons and the small arms being fired during the battle. He said that the Golden Standard was fired 3 times in succession with big casualties to the gun crew. Then it was captured by the Texans and turned around to fire 1 more time at the fleeing Mexicans. It was only then that the Twin Sisters fired 1 or more volleys before they were left standing in the melee that followed. Hunter's description clearly demonstrated the size difference in the cannons, even though both were the same caliber. He called them the Little Twin Sisters and said they sounded like popcorn in an oven compared to the booming of the Golden Standard. After the battle, 1 twin was sent to accompany Thomas Rusk on his campaign to shadow the Mexican army as they withdrew from Texas. It was used to fire a salute and a burial ceremony to honor the remains of the Texans who were massacred at Goliad. The 2nd twin was moved to Galveston Island and inventoried there on June the 1st. After a couple of years at Galveston, both were sent to a new arsenal in Houston. Both fired a salute in the 1839 Independence Day celebration in Houston. A year after Austin was founded, the twins and other cannons were sent there to protect the capital from Indian raids and a feared Mexican reinvasion. They were fired in Austin's celebration of the 5th anniversary of San Jacinto. They were still in Austin later that year when they were recorded in an inventory taken by Secretary of War George Hockley. They again appear in the historical record in late 1841 in Austin when they were used to celebrate Sam Houston's re-election as president. In 1842, Mexico sent an army back to Texas and occupied San Antonio. The Twins were set up to defend Austin by guarding the river crossing. The Mexican army soon withdrew, and the cannons remained in Austin in an arsenal for the next 20 years. In late 1863, Union forces landed at Brownsville and threatened to march into Texas. San Antonio was the closest major Texas city, and at that time it had virtually no defenses, as all of the focus had been on the eastern border and the Gulf Coast. Rip Ford headed the efforts in San Antonio and, being from Austin, knew that the Twins were there. They were noted in the arsenal on November the 30th, badly deteriorated after 20 years of inactivity. Ford was sent to San Antonio in February and began to plan an advance against the Union forces on the Rio Grande. He called for the Twins to be sent from Austin, and they arrived on March the 1st. In April, they were briefly sent to Corpus Christi and then returned to San Antonio. They were soon redeployed and by early May arrived at Fort Brown, which Ford had taken from the Union forces there. A year later, the Battle of Palmito Ranch was fought near Brownsville. Ford used 6 cannons very effectively in this engagement and won the battle. The Twin Sisters were 2 of these 6 guns. Lee had already surrendered at Appomattox before this engagement. After the battle at Palmito Ranch, Ford discharged his men but left the artillery at Fort Brown. His commanding officer, General James Slaughter, fled into Mexico to avoid being imprisoned by the occupying Union authorities. He took Ford's 6 cannons across the river and gave them to Thomas Mejia, the Mexican army general there who was fighting Mexican rebels who wanted to overthrow the French-dominated Mexican government at that time. Union officials demanded that Mejia return the cannons, and he did so on July the 9th. So our Twin Sisters had 3 moments of fame, first being used in the victory at San Jacinto, second in the victory in the last battle of the Civil War, and third in the defense of Matamoros in a Mexican Civil War. They played an influential role in both victories, but probably did not see active duty in the brief Matamoros defensive effort. Here is the letter which states that the Twin Sisters were located in Austin and would be sent to Rip Ford in San Antonio to accompany his expedition to the Rio Grande. This is the last known historical record that specifically mentions the Twin Sisters by name. It also reinforces the earlier information saying they were iron 6-pounders. Later references to Ford's 6 cannons only say that they were light artillery with no calibers given. Here is a postcard taken at the parade ground on Fort Brown in October of 1865. The caption says that the image shows caissons and cannons of Confederate General Slaughter that were given to the Mexican Army and then returned upon Union demand. From left to right are 2 large baggage wagons, 6 caissons with spare wheels on their back, and, by the 3 men near the flagpole, at least 1 cannon and perhaps 2 more. If these are the Slaughter guns, they might include the Twin Sisters. Based on my research, I personally think it is more likely that these are artillery wagons and guns brought into Texas and into Mexico in July of 1865 by a different group of Confederate officials fleeing into Mexico. 6 new cannons and several wagon loads of infield rifles were taken by General Joseph Shelby at Corsicana, Texas, after being abandoned following Appomattox. Shelby crossed at Eagle Pass and sold all of this armament to Mexican liberal forces. A month later, they were captured by French and Mexican imperialists, allies of Mejia in Matamoros. Union officers sent letters to demand the return of these guns, but no proof has been found that indicates this actually happened. The number of pieces and their apparent good condition better match descriptions of the guns brought by Shelby than those of Ford and Slaughter. Regardless of which cannons are in this photograph, we know that the twin sisters were at Fort Brown in July 1865 and lost to the historical record thereafter. Now let's look at what happened to the Golden Standard. It was moved to Galveston soon after the battle and appeared in an inventory there on June the 1st. As mentioned earlier, its large size and length was ideally suited for use in a ship, so the Texans installed it on their war schooner Independence. This ship patrolled the Texas coast for a while and was attacked by two Mexican warships at the mouth of the Brazos on April 17, 1837. The Mexicans captured the ship intact and added it to their naval fleet. This was a big propaganda opportunity for the Mexican authorities, who were still smarting with embarrassment over their loss of Texas in the 1836 war. A Mexico City newspaper article bragged about the fact that they now had the cannon lost by Santa Anna at San Jacinto. They called it an 8 caliber. We know that it originally was a 6-pounder, so either the newspaper made a mistake or it had been bored out to fire a 9-pound ball for use on the Independence. Apparently, there was some identification on the cannon listing the names of several prominent Texas women. We do know on other occasions that groups of women organized fundraising campaigns to purchase a cannon when the military could not afford to do so. There are no other known records of this happening with this cannon. There are a couple of sketchy legends about what ultimately happened to the Golden Standard after this, but it's probably best just to say we don't know. It has not likely survived, as it would still be identifiable by its inscribed name, El Volcan, the volcano. There have been several conflicting accounts about the twin sisters as to their caliber and what happened to them after San Jacinto. All eyewitnesses said they were iron, as did those responsible for making them in Cincinnati. The several accounts that say they were bronze were all second-hand and confused them with other cannons. Regarding the caliber, the accounts are about equally split between 4 and 6-pounders. 6 wins on the strength of the testimony of the men who orchestrated their manufacture and of Sam Houston and Thomas Rusk, both of whom were intimately involved with obtaining them and providing ammunition for them. Official ordnance inventories also said they were 6-pounders. There are several versions of what happened to them after San Jacinto. The 2 accounts that have received the most attention say they were either buried in Harrisburg or shipped to New York at the end of the Civil War. My research that you have heard earlier convinces me that they were last known to be at Fort Brown in July of 1865. One reason why some said the twins were 4-pounders is because they were about the same size as a standard 4-pounder. Here's a list of lengths and weights for the different 6 and 4-pound cannons that were available. The smallest 6-pounders were 6 feet long. That's what the twin sisters were. That's the same length as a standard size 4-pounder, and the weight is not that far apart. It was easy to visually confuse them. Several shipments of cannons coming to Texas after the 1836 battle have been confused with the twin sisters. There were 3 sets of guns, 2 iron and 1 bronze, that led to most of the confusion. They're highlighted with a red star on this chart. I'll cover these in more detail, but first let's look at the other 2. 2 bronze 6-pounders were purchased by Thomas Green in Alabama during the campaign. They arrived in Velasco shortly after the battle. A steamboat captain later wrote that he'd unloaded them in Velasco and that they were the twin sisters. He was mistaken. He'd unloaded the green twins instead. 2 bronze 9-pounders that were sent from Havana to aid Texas in its revolution were lost off of Galveston in a shipwreck in 1837. They were recovered in 1873 and became property of the Galveston Artillery Company. Both of these sets of bronze guns had someone complaining that they were the twin sisters. They were mistaken. The Texans did receive 2 iron cannons very shortly after the battle that were later mistaken for the twins. The steamboat Cayuga assisted Houston's army before and shortly after the battle. It was armed with 2 iron 4-pounders. These cannons were fired in a salute to the victory when the Cayuga arrived at San Jacinto from Galveston 3 days after the battle. 2 days later they were back in Galveston, and the guns were unloaded and set up as the first artillery in newly constructed Fort Travis. In 1842, a hurricane badly damaged the fort, and it was reconstructed with the help of the Galveston Artillery Company. The Cayuga Twins were replaced with bigger guns and sent to Houston to be refurbished and given to the Galveston Artillery Company. The blacksmith who did the refurbishing sent an invoice for his services and noted that they were iron 4-pounders, which they were, but he also called them twin sisters, which they were not. These same 2 guns were later bored out to carry a 6-pound ball in preparation for the Civil War. They continued to be mistakenly identified as the twin sisters throughout the war. After the war ended, they probably were among the group noted at either Harrisburg or Houston and were sent to Galveston and shipped east. Here's that blacksmith invoice saying he worked on 2 4-pound cannons, which he said were the twin sisters. The other popular legend about the fate of the twin sisters involved 2 of the 6 cannons that Thomas Jefferson Chambers acquired on behalf of the nascent Texan government in 1836. They were iron 6-pounders delivered in late 1836. 12 years later, after Texas became a state and the U.S. military took over, there were more cannons in Texas than was needed. 2 of the Chambers guns were sent to a scrapyard in New Orleans and forgotten. When it became apparent that the South might secede from the Union, Texas asked Louisiana to send them back. They were finally located and refurbished by Louisiana before being returned. They arrived at Galveston in April of 1861. Louisiana had attached a presentation plaque to the carriage that said, "This gun was used with terrible effect at the Battle of San Jacinto." They were not the real twin sisters, but now everyone thought they were. They remained in Houston for local defense during the war. After it was over, they moved to a rail yard in anticipation of being shipped back east. A Union soldier from Ohio, a man named Sweetman, saw them and made a detailed note including a drawing of the carriage plaque and an inscription on the barrel which identified the guns as being presented to the Republic of Texas by Thomas Chambers. Sweetman sent this information back to Texas in 1809, and it was widely reported in newspapers that the twin sisters were last seen in Houston in July of 1865, and this was the beginning of a popular legend concerning the fate of these famous Texas cannons. The Chambers guns were in fact shipped back east because the plaque from one of them was located in New York and sent back to the Texas governor in 1924. It's in a museum at Baylor today. The Houston Artillery Company was given 2 of the 6 new bronze 6-pounders purchased by the Republic in 1840. They were socially competing with the Galveston Artillery Company, who had a pair of cannons they claimed to be the twin sisters. Not to be outdone, Houston apparently had someone stamp an engraving on the gun barrels that said, "Presented to the Republic of Texas by the ladies of Cincinnati." They were fired in salutes in several celebrations in the 1850s, and most observers thought they were the real guns of San Jacinto. After the war, a Confederate soldier named Henry North Graves was paroled and leaving Galveston when he and some companions saw those guns at the rail depot in Harrisburg. They removed them from the depot and buried them near Buffalo Bayou to keep them out of the hands of the Union occupiers. North later came back to find them, but was not able to remember exactly where he buried them. Since then, there have been several extensive searches made to find them, all unsuccessful. And now we know why. They aren't there. A one-sentence newspaper blurb from 1865 noted that 2 bronze cannons were dug up some 3 miles from Houston. These were probably the Houston Artillery Company guns Henry North buried, and they were likely sent to Galveston soon thereafter and shipped back east. That wraps up my presentation for today. The details of my research on the San Jacinto artillery and all of the other cannons used in 1835 and 1836 are included in my book titled Cannons of the Texas Revolution and available on the Amazon bookstore. I've enjoyed sharing this information with you today, and thank you very much for your attendance. I'll be available for questions later in today's program.
That was great, Jim. Thank you so much. That really, and I'm telling you, Louis Allback and Bob Sewell and the rest of us spent one whole summer digging in Harrisburg and the mosquitoes and everything else with a couple of archaeologists for those damn cannons, right, you guys?
Now you know why.
We found a couple of railroad tracks, I
Yep.
think, which looked awfully like cannon from above, but
Storage tank, you know, it was pretty brutal. Does anybody have any questions? That was a fabulous history. Oh my God.
I have a question. So Jim, who do you think received them back east? Is there any information about that?
Did you say who sent them back east?
No, who may have received them back east?
Oh, we have no idea. You know, I don't know. It was like it was most probably some military operation, and but you know, there's no records that we've been able to find that would tell.
They just went back east and disappeared.
Yeah, the iron ones probably got melted down somewhere. Some of them did get saved. There are a couple of 1836 cannons that had Texas connections that were found in a military army depot up there, and we know about them, but we haven't found these yet, and probably never will. They don't have any identification on them.
Wow.
Right. Yeah.
That was really interesting. Anybody else have any questions?
I don't know if you can hear me. This is Beth.
Yes.
I don't have any questions, but your presentation cleared up a lot of things that I was confused about, Jim. Because I've heard that these cannon were 6-pounders, they were 8-pounders, they were 4-pounders, they were in Galveston, they were hither and yon. So the presentation was absolutely incredible. And is there any possibility that I think I have your book. I was just checking my bookshelf to see, but if I don't have it, I'm going to get it. But is all this information listed in your book?
Yes, it is.
Okay. If I can't find it in my library here, I'm ordering it tomorrow.
I've actually got a blog that you can have it for free if you want it.
You bet. Yes, because
I priced my book about as low as Amazon would let me. So I make about 75 cents on each book that's sold. I'd love you to buy my book because there's more stuff in there. But if you want it for free, look at well, I guess it's listed on look at the author page on Amazon, and it'll point you to my blog articles. And I've got one of them in there on the twin sisters, and this is all in there.
Okay.
Great.
Fantastic. Because there was someone that was a distant relative by marriage of in my husband's lineage Luke Falvell, who captained the Flash.
He
And
did.
yes, and he had those twin sisters on there, and Robert Potter said they were on the Flash, and they were on, and then I found letters that said in the records that said that they were actually on the Ohio, not the Opie, as
No.
was listed on the website for the Texas History Online. So
Falvell was the steamboat captain who unloaded Thomas Green's twins. If you look at his information, he says that when he took them out of a barrel, they were covered with green stuff. Green stuff is only on cannons that are bronze, and they get a green patina on them.
right.
And that's not iron. So he didn't unload the twin sisters. He unloaded the Thomas Green twins.
Okay.
Hmm.
Interesting.
Fantastic. That was a great presentation. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Every Texan should hear that, because I know that all of us, even those of us who dug at Harrisburg, have heard the wrong story. Obviously, otherwise we wouldn't have gone out there and spent all.
Like Beth, we've heard 8 different versions, and it's never clear like where they're coming from or who's telling what version or why. Yeah, this was a great presentation, Jim. Thanks so much.
Yeah, agreed. Great one, Jim.
A short paper from me about the Flash, Luke Falvell and the twin sisters.
Wow. There you go. There we go.
Jim, so much. That was fantastic.
Good. Glad you enjoyed it.
Are there any other questions?
Hello?
Oh, go ahead.
Hello? Can you hear me?
Hey, Bill.
That's
Oh,
good.
yeah, I'm gonna mention that back around 2014, there's, I live down here in the southeast part of Harris County, and there's some work on Coward's Creek about apparently some cannons that have been left there at the time of the Battle of San Jacinto. I haven't looked at this stuff recently, so I'm not too sure about the details, but apparently there's at least, they may have been from General Uriah's army, just dumped them there and ran off or something, or I don't know, or maybe it's somebody else dropped the cannons, but there's some indication that the cannons there's something down there, and people have been, kids have been swimming around there and standing on it and stuff like that.
Really?
What is this information from, Bill? Where did you get it from?
I've got, let's see, let me check. I got it right here on my machine here. The Bay Area Citizen,
Uh-huh.
and has series articles, and the Houston News, and I believe the Houston Chronicle had something stuff too. This is all back
Okay.
in 2017.
Yeah, they did.
I mean,
I've seen-
2014.
I've seen those articles, and
Yeah.
I don't know if there's any cannons there or not. There might be, but I am
out there.
completely
It's out there.
convinced they have nothing to do with 1836.
Yeah, well, I really
No,
don't know
okay.
myself either. Yeah, like I said, this more or less dropped off around not too long after they had stuff in the papers about it.
Hmm.
And actually, it's just not too far where I live here. But it's kind of hard to get to.
Yeah.
It's all grown up around there.
All of these archaeological places are hard to get to.
Yeah, aren't they? It's all trees and stuff there, and it's supposed to be-
San Jacinto is the closest thing to my old backyard.
Yeah.
anyhow. I just thought I'd bring that up.
That's it. Bill.
Interesting.
Thank you for that.
I gave copies of the stuff to HAS at the time, so.
Huh. Interesting.
Yeah.
Anybody else have any questions or comments before we end this? I do want to say that we just renewed our contract with the Trina Mendenhall Center for next year. And in a really, really perfect world, hopefully we'll start meeting in person next month. So just, hang loose for more information, and, hopefully we'll be going back. So thank all of you very much. I hope you come to the Texas Archaeological Society meeting. As Liz said, there's still time to register. I think you'll really enjoy Doug Boyd's presentation tomorrow night at 6:30. If you choose to go. I've seen it before. It is fabulous. So, and so many of us worked out at Frosttown
Mm.
so many months. that, and he highlights a lot of the artifacts that we recovered. So anyway, nice seeing everybody. Have a good evening. We'll see you next month or at an event